Thank you all for joining us today to talk about diversity and inclusion in student organizations. So this is a leadership workshop hosted by the Center for Student Involvement. This is a new series that we've started called Thursdays at 3. So every Thursday at 3, we're going to take on a new leadership topic or student organization management topic or involvement and kind of dive into it a little deeper for a while. We know that Thursdays at 3 don't always work for everyone. And so we're actually recording this session as well. So I just want to give you all a heads up that we will be posting this presentation also on our YouTube channel for the Center for Student Involvement as well. So you can share this with other people later also if you would like to. So my name is Sarah Hyman. I am the Assistant Director for Leadership in the Center for Student Involvement. And I also mentioned Anna is on here as well today. She is our Student Leadership Specialist. And so today we're going to go through a couple different things, but I'd like to start out with some ground rules, if you'll bear with me. First, I just want to acknowledge that I am a person who experiences privilege because of some of the identities that I have. I'm going to attempt to lead us through a discussion today about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I know inevitably it will be biased because of the lenses of privilege that I see through on a daily basis, and many of those lenses are implicit biases that I don't even think twice about. So still, I'm going to do my best to acknowledge and work mindfully through those biases and to have an open and authentic experience with you today while we tackle just a small part of what diversity and inclusion looks like in student organizations. Second, I want to let you know that I am on an anti-racist journey. Race and ethnicity are only a piece of the diversity puzzle, which we'll talk about later on. But it is an important and impactful piece, especially in our society today. So there may be some of you in this meeting or who are watching this recording who are at various stages of your own journey. Maybe you're at the beginning and you're here to help educate yourself and soak up as much knowledge as you can. Maybe you're farther along in your journey than this presentation or even myself are as a presenter. Maybe you don't even realize you're on this journey at all, and all of that is okay. This presentation is structured as an introduction to thinking about diversity and inclusion in the context of student organizations, and hopefully will provide you with some concrete steps and actions that you can take back and continue in your own work with your own organization. So today, for ground rules, I just want you all to know that this is an inclusive space. Everyone has a right to be here. Everyone has a space here, and everyone is welcome no matter your background or your experiences that you've been through. All opinions are welcome today. I want to acknowledge everyone has a different lived experience, and so we may not see things the same way. Therefore, we may not agree on everything. And that's okay. It's okay to disagree. Third, everyone will be treated with respect. Every human being has an inherent value and deserves respect. So therefore, we will treat each other with respect as we participate in discussions today. We are accepting, again, that all lived experiences are valid. And third, we want to have solution-oriented dialogue. So in our discussion and in our comments today, we want to make sure we're focused on working towards a solution versus just complaining about things as we talk through some of these issues. So with that said, can we all agree on these ground rules, or is there anything missing that anyone would like to add? All right, I see some thumbs up. Thank you all. Thank you. Okay, so with that said, let me give you a little overview of what you can expect today. So we're going to start by talking about what does diversity mean? What does it look like? What is inclusion and why is inclusion important? And then we're going to talk about how to practice inclusion in your organization. Then we're going to talk about equity and steps, how we can work towards equity. So that is an outline of our day. And we'll see just how long it takes us, but hopefully we can get through everything in good detail. So I asked this before we really started the formal presentation about what your goal is for attending today, what made you interested in attending. And for the people who are part of this recording right now, just trying to, I think it sounded like, and please correct me or weigh in if I'm paraphrasing incorrectly, but just trying to continue to educate yourselves and learn ways to continue to include a diverse group of students in your organization. Would you say that's accurate or correct? Okay, great. Okay, it's always helpful to just know what we're all looking for and helping to get out of today as well. Okay, so my first question that I want to discuss with everyone is, when you hear the word diversity, what comes to mind? And feel free to unmute yourselves, or you can utilize the chat as well if you'd like.
So I guess I would overgeneralize and say diversity is having people with multiple backgrounds and experiences present. Just because I've learned more recently that there are levels between diversity, inclusion, equity, and so forth. So for me, diversity has become there's more presence of people with different experiences, ethnicities, backgrounds, identities, and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, having different identities, like you said, represented in a group. That sounds like a good definition of diversity. Anything else that comes to mind when you think about diversity? Or how about the next question? Why is diversity desirable? Why would your organization be interested in being more diverse?
So that question, I actually think of it kind of in the context of working on teams, maybe not necessarily like within like a specific organization or anything. But in my experience, it always seems like the more diverse the team is, the more experiences you can talk about and work through, and the better you're able to generate solutions. And so that's kind of where I think about like desirable diversity.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Having different opinions and perspectives out there, that's always a good thing, right? This question kind of stumps me, so I'd be curious to hear how others might answer this. How will you know when you have a diverse organization? Any thoughts on that?
I kind of have a personal goal for when you don't have people who are the onlys in the group. Like not the only woman, not the only person of color, not the only trans person, but when there's enough inclusion that more people will walk into a room or be on a call and realize that they're not the only one representing a particular identity that they might hold.
I think that's amazing. I love that. And I think that the problem, I think, with that question sometimes is it's hard not to just think of specific examples on specific identities. But I think the way you explained it, Sarah, still reaches every point of that. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we want to do an activity together now. So I want everyone to take a minute here to look at this bingo card that Anna has made for us today. And look this over, and what we're going to do is see if we can get a bingo based on the identities represented in our meeting today. So I'll give a minute or so to just read through everything. Okay, maybe you've had a chance to kind of read through some of the things listed on there. Would anyone feel comfortable sharing an identity that they identify with that's listed on this card here?
I've lived in 3 or more states.
Oh, that's awesome. Where have you lived, Ashley?
Iowa, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Kansas.
Awesome.
And I like sushi.
You're helping us out here in the O column. I love it.
I
Anyone?
was born outside of Kansas,
You were born outside of Kansas. Where were you born, Sarah?
Alaska.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
Perk of being an Army brat.
Has anyone lived on a farm?
Nope.
I can only check off, it looks like, maybe in the second row. I know all the words of the K-State fight song, and I know what Yom Kippur is, if that is helpful for our bingo. I don't know.
That's great. I was going to say, I changed majors in college, if we were going for a diagonal here. But I don't speak more than one language, unfortunately, and I'm not an aunt.
It depends on the fluency level.
It depends on the what?
The fluency level.
The fluency level? Oh, okay.
Sarah
But I
Kay,
am an aunt.
ants. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'd say that's kind of close. And with 4 of us in the room, I can understand why it still might be a challenge on here. But of course, you can imagine, add a couple more, and I bet we'd have multiple bingos on here. So what does this activity kind of tell us about diversity? I think, to me, it shows that there's different ways of being diverse, right? There's different aspects to that. And a lot of these things listed on here, you might not know about me based on just looking at me, right? But we still all have unique experiences, where we were born, where we've lived, things about our family, all of those kind of things that have an influence on who we are, and really have probably contributed to, I know I spoke earlier about the lenses that I see through. Same thing, the experiences you've lived through that you have that shape how you see the world, right? So let's talk a little bit more about diversity here. We want to go ahead and define diversity just so we know what we're talking about and working with here. So diversity is the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders, sexual orientations, and etc. So that etc. piece is what that activity was just kind of telling us about. And so let's talk a little bit more about the etc. piece. So this is a dimensions of diversity wheel, or the 4 layers of diversity wheel. And so as you can see listed on here, there's many different things and ways and categories, I guess, that make a person maybe different than somebody else's experience, right? And so let's kind of break this down. So in the center there, the blue circle, that's our first layer. That's the personality layer, right? So personality shows how a person interacts with others and what his or her characteristics are, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, whether you're more active or more passive. Maybe you're a fast and dynamic doer. Maybe you're more the silent and reflective type, and how all of these aspects together affect the way in which a person could be treated by others. The next layer, the green layer, that's our second layer, that's the internal dimensions. So these are based on 6 aspects that an individual possibly cannot choose or control themselves. So they are given to them: the age, gender, sexual orientation, physical ability, ethnicity, and race. And these aspects influence how a person is treated in communication and interaction with others as well. Then we move to the external dimensions, the third layer. And this external dimensions depict the outcomes of life and experiences and decisions or choices that are taken. So altogether, there's 10 different areas in this layer, such as education and work experience, income, marital status, through which people can be appreciated or degraded, connected or disconnected, depending on how exactly these aspects are seen and applied to the individual. And then finally, we have our organizational dimensions. That's the fourth layer. These include elements that are integrated into work and social interaction in an organization or at a workplace. So for us, we can think about in the context of student organizations, these kind of things. They contain a number of hierarchical as well as functional aspects of working life and how a person relates to them in the context of diversity. So looking at this wheel here, would anyone feel comfortable sharing anything about one of the categories listed in the dimensions here about yourself that you identify with? For example, I'll start. In the personality dimension, I would say that I am an ENFP, if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs. So meaning I'm an extroverted person. I rely on my intuition and feelings to make decisions. I am more perceptive than I am judging. If you were worried about Harry Potter, I would say I'm a Hufflepuff when it comes to my personality. So there's different ways to think about personality. But those are some of my, I would say, personality identities. Would anyone like to share anything about themselves?
Being a parent is a big part of who I am. It's really important to me. I have a daughter and one on the way, so yeah, I like being a parent a lot. So
congratulations, Ashley.
Thanks.
I would say in my internal go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I identify very strongly with my, I guess it'd be my work content field. So I identify very strongly as a librarian. That's a strong part of my identity.
I love that. That's great. Anyone else?
I guess this would maybe fall in the recreational habits, but I consider myself a very outdoorsy person. I like to spend a lot of free time hiking and camping, so that's a kind of a big part of what I do for fun and like how I would describe myself.
Great, thank you. All right, so again, as you can see on here, there are many different aspects to diversity. And I think a lot of times what people immediately think of, right, are racial diversity, gender, maybe even age. But there are other ways that a group of people can be diverse. And so I do just want to call attention to that. I also want to touch briefly about the topic of intersectionality. So I'm not going to dive deep into this topic today, but it is worth doing more research on. But I just want to mention this. So if you're not familiar, intersectionality refers to the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. So, for example, in the category of female, not every female is treated exactly the same just because they are female, right? White women and Black women are treated differently. And then that's not just because of race. Black women and Black men are treated differently. White women and white men are treated differently. So intersectionality is really about the concept of where your identities start to intersect and overlap and kind of stack on top of each other. And this can create entirely different systems of discrimination and the way people are treated. So this is something that is important to be aware of. And I do just want to go ahead and plug that there is a TED Talk on this. It's called The Urgency of Intersectionality by Kimberly Crenshaw, if you'd like to learn more about this topic. But for us, in terms of understanding why diversity is important, we want to go through some of kind of the cases of the case you could make for diversity and why it's important. So let's start by talking about the moral case. So this is, of course, based on basically your morals and ethics. The moral case or social justice case asserts that each person has value to contribute and that we must address barriers and historical factors that have led to unfair conditions of marginalized populations. So really the moral case is basically diversity is important because it's the right thing to do, right? Because each person has value, so we should be valuing each person. There's also the economic case, which is based on the idea that organizations that tap into diverse talent pools are stronger and more efficient. So economists actually see discrimination as an economic inefficiency, the result of a systematic misallocation of human resources. And obviously that sounds kind of cold and to the point, but it is another way to think about the benefits of diversity. The Center for American Progress finds that workplace discrimination against employees based on race, gender, or sexual orientation actually costs businesses an estimated $64 billion annually. And that amount represents the annual estimated cost of losing and replacing more than 2 million American workers who leave their jobs each year due to unfairness and discrimination. So it's actually cost organizations to not value their members and to not be diverse. And diverse organizations are actually more efficient as well. Then there is the market case. And this states that organizations will better serve their customers if they reflect the diversity of their market base. And as we may be aware of, a dramatic demographic shift is already underway in the United States, which will be a majority non-white country around 2043, which sounds futuristic, but really we're talking about 22 years. The United States will be a majority non-white, according to the Census Bureau. So the market case says that if your organization is trying to serve a certain population of people, so perhaps maybe your organization is focused on representing the students of Kansas State University, then your organization will be more successful and better able to serve that market if you represent them equally and represent the diversity of your market. So that's another way to think about the benefits of diversity. And then thirdly, there's the results case. So the results case is that diverse teams lead to better outputs. So Scott Page, the author of The Differences, How the Power of Diversity Creates Better Groups, Firms, Schools, and Societies, uses mathematical modeling and case studies to show how diversity leads to increased productivity. So his research found that diverse groups of problem solvers actually outperform groups of the best individuals at problem solving. So if Anna is a rock star at solving problems and she's the best of the best, and I have a group of Annas working on a problem, actually a group of diverse individuals who maybe are not the rock stars of problem solving, but because they're diverse and they have different perspectives and ideas they can bring to that situation, that group of diverse individuals will outperform the group of rock star problem solvers simply because of that diversity of thought and problem solving abilities. So here's a way to visualize diversity, right? And the benefits of diversity. If every member of your organization was the same, and you think of each person as a puzzle piece, you can't really put together a puzzle when all the pieces look and function the same, right? So I like this visual representation because it makes sense that they can interlock, they can work together, but they might not give you a complete picture. Or if the goal is to complete the puzzle, as it is when you're assembling puzzles, you won't be able to complete that project, complete that task to its fullest capability without diversity. So now we want to talk about inclusion. So we talked about diversity, and of course, a lot of when you're talking about diversity, the word inclusion is right after it. Diversity and inclusion, diversity and inclusion. So now we want to transition to that and talk a little bit more about what inclusion is. What is the difference between diversity and inclusion? Does anybody have any thoughts on how you would say what the difference is, how you would maybe explain this to someone? The difference between diversity and inclusion?
I can't remember who gave this workshop, but last year I attended a diversity and inclusion workshop, and they gave an analogy about diversity and inclusion. And they were talking about how it's one thing to be invited to like the party, but another to be like asked to dance or asked to participate in events that are happening there. And so I like that. It helps me kind of think about how the two are different, and how it's one thing, again, to be like, oh, like you can come to this event or do whatever, but then another to actually be an active member.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anna. That's a really great analogy. I agree. And it makes sense to me in my head too. I do have this video to show us that also gets into that exact same topic of the difference between the two. So let's watch this for a minute.
Stay tuned. First things first, what is the difference between diversity and inclusion? If we want to understand the difference between diversity and inclusion, we first need to define both terms. Diversity in the workplace refers to a workforce that's made up of people from, among other things, different ages, cultural backgrounds, geographies, physical abilities and disabilities, religions, genders, sexual orientation, and so forth. True workforce diversity, however, goes beyond these social categories. It includes all the elements that make individual employees unique from one another, their perspectives, preferences, characteristics, and even their bias. Inclusion, on the other hand, can be defined as the achievement of a work environment in which all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully and have equal access to opportunities and resources regardless of their differences. So then, when we talk about diversity versus inclusion, what's the difference? Put simply, diversity is about the what. It focuses on the makeup of your workforce. Inclusion, on the other hand, is about the how. The creation of a work environment and culture that enables all employees to participate and thrive.
All right. So as they explained in our video, I think based on the research I've done to talk today about the differences between diversity and inclusion, that is a common example that they give, that diversity is the what you want, representation in your organization, and inclusion is the how. So how do you have that representation? How do you create a work environment and culture that enables all of your employees or your members, when we're talking about student organizations, to be able to participate and thrive? And so going back to our puzzle piece analogy here, as you can see on the left, now we have all the different puzzle pieces, right? So we've brought the diversity together. They're different shapes. They have smooth edges. They have wobbly edges. But are they really working together? Whereas you can see on the right, in inclusion, every piece is being used, is being incorporated equally. And that is how you are allowing your members to actually be a part of the organization versus just be there. So hopefully that makes sense. So one of the things that we really wanted to make sure we did today is to give you all some steps or things to walk away with that are concrete action steps that you can think about incorporating in your organization. So we're going to talk about the how of how you can practice inclusion. So the first thing is to make your members feel important. It is essential to build a sense of belonging in order for members to feel comfortable and to feel like they can be themselves in your organization. It helps foster better social bonds and creativity in your organization, but also be aware that making people feel important, making people feel welcome is not necessarily a linear process, and it can take time. This is not you do one thing at a meeting and now everybody feels equal and important in the organization. You do have to work hard and focus on diversity, plus be proactive about inclusion so you can establish that sense of belonging. So it is a process. I do want to ask, what might this look like in your organization, or how does your organization make your members feel important? Is there any example of something that you can point to that your organization currently does in an effort to make your members feel important? Or is there anything from your personal experience you could speak to on what they could do if you were the member to make you feel more important? Any examples that anyone would like to share?
Sarah, do you want to talk about the trivia night that's coming up?
Oh, yeah. So we, our ambassadors have several committees that they work on, which one, we're a big group, so that lets the ambassadors work within a smaller group so they kind of get to know each other. And so one of the activities our outreach to the libraries group is doing is we've planned a trivia night where library employees and ambassadors are going to play trivia based upon questions that our team came up with. And so they're taking the leadership on the project, and we're also trying to connect them to librarians and library employees so that they, so somebody knows them. Like, I think it's part of that, somebody knows who you are, they know your name kind of thing. That's what we're kind of hoping to have happen.
Absolutely. I do think that sounds so simple, but it is so important that people feel like, oh, someone knows my name. Someone knows who I am. I'm not just a face on a Zoom screen or, just a warm body in a room, but that I have some kind of personal connection, even if it's just being on first name basis with somebody. That really does make a difference to how people feel in an organization, for sure. Trivia night sounds fun. We're doing a trivia night tomorrow as well. So
Ooh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's a great activity. I'm a trivia nerd, so I love it. Okay, our next step to practicing inclusion is to be an empathetic leader. So leaders often need to put themselves in the shoes of others to understand that other person's experience. The more a leader is understanding, the more helpful it is to encourage a diverse and inclusive working culture. And again, I throw this back to you all. What's an example of empathetic leadership? Can you think of a way that a leader might demonstrate empathy?
I feel like especially this past year, and especially working with students, is finding that balance between this is a responsibility being in this organization, and here's like some group expectations, but also realizing that there are things that happen that like should just hit you sideways. And so how do you help somebody deal with whatever's come up in their life while still holding to these are the values of our organization? So.
Absolutely, I agree. I think being able to recognize that the thing, especially as a leader, like what your priorities are, or what the things that are weighing heavily on you right now, or what's on your plate, is not going to be the same thing that even the person right next to you is experiencing, let alone every other member of your organization. So like you're saying, being able to give people flexibility and understanding especially when things come up or are going on or don't go the way you had hoped or expected, and being able to listen to them and engage with them about that, I think is a great example of practicing empathy as a leader. Our next step is to automate the inclusive process. So setting goals for your recruitment of members to your organization might help expand your diversity in numbers, but this won't necessarily guarantee you that you have an inclusive organization, right? So it's important to remember that your members' experience goes beyond a one-on-one interaction that you might have with them. To be an inclusive organization, you need to look at the complete membership experience and try to promote inclusion daily, right? And try and measure its impact. So what are aspects of the member experience that you think you should consider when you're trying to ensure that you have inclusive practices that are happening? What are different experiences that members might have in your organization? Like one I immediately think of is, well, they have to come to the meetings, right? So where are my meetings held? What time of day are they held at, right? Those two things alone can be big barriers to different groups of people. I know Ashley mentioned being a parent. I am not a parent, but I can imagine that having a child that I am responsible for, especially depending on their age, you know, are they in school? Do I need to pick them up from daycare? All of those kind of things. If my meeting's happening after hours, that just might not be a possibility for me. Or now we're very comfortable doing things on Zoom, I think, but in the past, you have to be on campus in this building, in this room, in this meeting time. And again, maybe I could have made it if I was Zooming in from home, but if you need me to come to campus, I have to find a babysitter, right? Or things like that, that are just barriers. And again, those things are things that for me, as in this example, a single person, I might not think twice about. It works for me, so why wouldn't it work for you? So making sure that you're considering those different aspects of your members' experience, all the things that, basically all the touch points between them and your organization, and double checking that those are inclusive practices to have. Our fourth step is to remember that inclusion is a continuous process. You know, just having this conversation with members of your organizations or having a teaching moment, maybe you spend a meeting talking about diversity and inclusion, that is a great step. But of course, it's not going to be enough, again, to ensure that, oh, now we're inclusive because we did this training. So like any other behavior change, inclusion needs people to identify key moments that are happening and what's going to be required to build those new habits to create that new culture. When these behaviors are applied in an environment that supports open and healthy conversations, then that's when change actually becomes possible and things actually start to shift. So something you should maybe reflect on and ask yourselves is, does your organization support open and healthy conversations? Can your members be honest about where change needs to happen and the behaviors that need to be modified? And this of course goes back to being an empathetic leader, and it goes back to being open and respecting others as well. But that is something that your members need to be able to communicate back to you as well, is where that change needs to happen. Our next step we recommend is making better connections. You know, this is what I was just about to get into a moment ago, but I knew it was coming up. It was that people tend to react defensively with fear or with doubt when someone challenges their beliefs or says what they're doing needs to change or be improved, right? When you say you want to make changes so that your organization can be more inclusive, you might actually experience the opposite reaction of what you're hoping for. So when you're discussing change, focus on the possibilities that change can bring, right? The good things that can come out of this, as well as talk about the uplifting power of teamwork, right? That this is an opportunity for us to work as a team to accomplish this goal of being more inclusive. So find ways to support your members so that they can actively execute inclusive practices and take action to address their specific needs, such as giving them credit for working on inclusive practices or showing appreciation and recognition of those people who have generated new ideas and have thought about this and applied that kind of critical thinking and reflected on this. It builds confidence and trust between you and your members to do these things. So how can you connect with your members to support and encourage change towards inclusion? Again, I won't ask you all to answer this one because I think this is another one of those deeper questions, but that's another thing that I think it's good, especially for anybody who might be watching this recording later, to maybe pause this video and stop and think about how you can connect better with your members so that this work towards inclusion is a smoother process for everyone. Our next step is helping individuals thrive. So The structures of prejudice in society can affect an organization in the way that they recruit, that they accept people into their organization, and oftentimes ends up benefiting the members who fit best. And I put that in air quotes, who fit best, because that's a thing you can hear a lot of times if you're in a room that's doing recruitment, is finding the person who's the best fit for a position or best fit for the organization. So what we want you to do is to develop a culture in your organization that helps members contribute their skills. So focus on the skills that individuals can bring to your organization. So the quote unquote best fit for your organization will actually end up being an individual who's capable of bringing life to your organization's mission, your values, your purpose, with their hard work and dedication. And that might mean you have to help bring the best out of them and find new ways to work with people who maybe don't fit your immediate expectation of what the best fit will be. So again, this is an opportunity to reflect. Does your organization have a type? Have a certain type of member? Do you notice some trends among the membership of your organization? And how might you focus on individual strengths rather than best fit? That I think is a challenge for everyone. And this is something that I think that many of you who are students who might be watching this presentation may continue to see as you go into your careers as well, and you see hiring practices for companies. So just remember, this is a place where a lot of implicit biases can come up, and I'm going to talk about that later too, and to try and get away from that best fit mindset. And number 7 here for practicing inclusion is understanding your purpose. To build a diverse and inclusive culture in your organization, it's crucial to connect the dots between what's happening inside and outside of your organization. So what does your organization's reputation say about your culture? Are experiences being misunderstood, or do they paint an honest, although maybe imperfect, picture of your organization's priorities and practices? Inclusion is all about the way organizations operate, they work, they communicate, and contribute. So how does inclusion relate to the purpose of your organization? And I don't know if any of you have an answer to that immediately comes to the top of your head when you think about how would inclusion relate to what the purpose of your organization is. But if you do have any thoughts on that, I'd love to hear it.
I think it's representative of how the libraries is situated on campus. Like, we're not the library for one particular group, one particular college or department. We are literally serving everybody on campus. And we can't do that unless we have the voices to represent across campus. Absolutely.
I think that's a great summary and a great example of exactly why inclusion is so important, and it relates directly back to the entire purpose of your organization. Okay, so now we have talked about diversity, right? Where diversity is the representation of all of our varied identities and differences collectively and as individuals. And now we've talked a little bit about inclusion and how it builds a culture of belonging by actively inviting the contribution and participation of all people. And so now we're going to talk about the famous third word associated with diversity and inclusion, and that is equity. So before I move on, if anybody feels like, oh yeah, they got this, does anybody have a definition for equity or thoughts on what equity means to you? Or maybe an example of equity. Does anybody have an example of equity? I won't put you all on the spot for too long, especially because I'm sure you know I'm about to put a definition on the screen. So equity can be defined as seeking to ensure fair treatment, equality of opportunity, and fairness and access to information and resources for all. So when we think about what that actually looks like, what would an example of equity be? This is a common image that I think gets shared when people talk about equity a lot, and it kind of compares it to equality. What is the difference between equity and equality? So Would anyone like to say, what do you notice about these two images?
So we have side by side the same three people trying to look over a fence, and in one, each person has a box that's the same size, but since each person is a different height or physical ability, the box doesn't help everybody. Whereas on the next one side next to them, one person who can easily see over the fence doesn't have a box at all. A shorter person has two boxes, and a person who uses a wheelchair has a ramp, so they can all see over the fence now.
Does anybody know which one represents equity and which one represents equality? Go ahead, Sarah.
Equality is the one where they have the same boxes because that's equal, and equity is the one where they're all able to see over the fence.
Right, exactly. And I think I will speak, at least for me growing up, I thought equality was the right answer, right? Oh, equality is the thing we want. We all want equality. And of course we do want equality. And there's many aspects of equality that we are still striving for. But equality doesn't always help everyone equally, which sounds counterintuitive. But again, I think this picture really summarizes it well. Equity is really what we need in order to help everyone succeed, right? Some people need no boxes. Some people need two boxes. Some people need other accommodations, a ramp, for example, in order to achieve the same thing. And so I think, again, this visual representation, I think kind of says it all in terms of how different identities, again, those dimensions of diversity might need different accommodations or even just avenues available to them to be able to achieve the same successes as everyone else. So let's talk a little bit about what steps towards equity that your organization can take. So number one, assess your current structures and policies, right? So review your policies and identify your practices. And I think this can sometimes be a challenge because practices are not usually written down. They're kind of norms that your organization has established over time. They may change year to year, but it's kind of maybe just a pattern that you fall into, but it still takes some intentionality to identify what those are. And again, assess if they're being inclusive and if they are providing equity to your members. So look at your resource allocations. Examine the buy-in from your members, from your advisors, from maybe your external partners. Look at the big picture. What is the composition structure or the culture or the dynamics of your organization? What is the communication, the mission, the strategic direction that your organization is going? And then make sure to update these to reflect recognition of the importance of diversity and inclusion in your organization. And this will help you start laying the foundation to have it better represent your team and your goals. Another step towards equity that you can take is to designate a specific leader for your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. So whenever you see DEI written anywhere, it stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if you don't already have one, designate somebody specifically for this. Management and top level promotion of diversity inclusion will trickle down. And let me tell you, I do not like saying trickle down, but I could not think of another way to say it. But it really does help and make a difference to have buy-in from the top, the leaders of your organization, so that others can see somebody modeling these things that you want to achieve and actually can help influence the direction that your organization is going. So create a leadership position for DEI and make sure this position reports to your organization's president, or if you're a smaller organization, ensure that DEI is a core value and responsibility among all of your leadership positions, and a designated responsibility to at least one of the top people in your leadership team. So that person can focus on developing your diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, can focus on educating your members, can focus on evaluating policies and practices, and identifying areas that are in need of change. But be explicit that your DEI officer is there to serve as a leader, but don't fall into the trap of assuming that diversity and inclusion is its own job. It is still everybody's job, but this person is there to help, again, move that needle for your organization and lead that effort for them. The next step towards equity that your organization can take is to communicate and educate all stakeholders on the importance of diversity and inclusion. So for any DEI plan to work, it needs buy-in. And I mentioned it needs that buy-in from the top, and ultimately it needs buy-in from all of your stakeholders. So you will have to communicate your plan clearly and effectively, which means making sure you have clear definitions, goals, and plans. Make sure your organization knows and agrees with and understands what your definitions of diversity and inclusion are, as well as what your goals are. Make your goals visible, measurable, and time-bound so that they can be evaluated and adjusted and built upon. Make sure you're determining who this message needs to be tailored to and use these elements to develop your policy. And as always, reinforcing and creating opportunities for ongoing learning and improvement are important. So another reflection question for organizations is to think about who are your stakeholders? What does that mean? It's not necessarily, again, just your members. It might be your leadership team. It might be your advisor. Maybe you have a sponsor. Maybe you have multiple sponsors. Maybe you have a sponsoring department. Maybe you have frequent collaborators who you work with in the community or other student organizations. These can all be people who you might need to spend some time intentionally thinking about how to educate them and how to promote your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Another step is to update your recruitment and acceptance policies to instill, again, diversity from the top down. I mentioned this earlier, but recruitment is one of those areas where implicit biases can really have a negative impact on slowing down diversity in your organization. So implicit biases, otherwise sometimes people call this unconscious biases, right, are those biases that you have that you do not think about. I mentioned this earlier when I was introducing myself, something that is so instilled in you, in your mind, that you really don't even realize that you do it. So implicit bias training is very important to have with any recruitment team, or maybe your whole organization if it's a group effort for recruiting, and remind them of your diversity. Just reminding recruitment teams of diversity and inclusion can go a long way, especially at the beginning of that process. And then beyond the actual recruitment process, make sure the roles within your organization are flexible so that they meet the needs and abilities of a diverse range of members. For example, flexible attendance policies or participation guidelines, or a variety of leadership opportunities. So another reflection point, again, would be, what is an example of a way in which your organization can recruit diverse members? I don't know if any of you have an answer to that you'd like to share right now. Just an example of how you try to recruit diverse students to your organization. But it's definitely something to think about and reflect on, because it's very easy to think, oh, we do a good job of that. Or, oh yeah, well, we do the best we can. But really, when you stop and think about it, you're like, actually, there's probably a lot more we could be doing. We don't post anything in the K-State Today. We only advertise at this location on campus and nowhere else, right? We only advertise to undergraduate students, and we're leaving out graduate and non-traditional students and all of these things. So there are some different aspects to think about when you're thinking about how you're recruiting and your qualifications for accepting members into your organization. All right, factor in diversity and inclusion into your day-to-day practices. Relate diversity and inclusion, again, back to your organization's success. And we talked about relating it back to your purpose earlier as well, but also back to your success. So make sure you are tackling that culture in your organization and evaluating that. and just maintaining a focus on growth, on moving forward. No one is going to be perfect. I am certainly not perfect. Organizations are not going to be perfect, but just focusing on growth, trying things, improving as you go. That's what's important. Change leadership mindsets from seeing complaints as threats to valuing them as insights that can spark positive organizational change. So maybe this is something that one of you wouldn't mind answering for us today, but how does diversity and inclusion impact your organization's success? And as I read that out loud, I feel like you kind of said this earlier, but if anybody would like to summarize or paraphrase again, how diversity and inclusion actually impacts your organization's success. I will say, I used to advise an organization that was about promoting and supporting women in the STEM fields. And so women in STEM, that is a group, based on like one identity, but I mentioned intersectionality earlier and all of the barriers and challenges that crop up for different, basically, intersections within women in STEM. And so being aware of that, first of all, and trying to problem solve again on how to address that and how to think more critically about not only the barriers that one person might face, but again, those different intersections, really allows us to then actually support women in STEM and actually hopefully make a difference, not only in their experience, but their future success as well in their career fields too. So that's one example of how I would say diversity and inclusion would impact that organization's success. All right, next step towards equity is avoiding tokenism. So tokenism is the practice of doing something such as hiring a person who belongs to a minority group, but you're only doing that to prevent criticism or to give off the appearance that, oh yeah, we treat everyone fairly. Look, we're diverse. We have this one person of color in our organization. And that is tokenizing that individual. You're not actually interested in what their strengths are, what their perspectives they're bringing to the table. You're more interested just basically to say that you're a diverse organization. And so it's important for you to be aware that feeling like a token can be very draining on your members, especially if they're the only member of an underrepresented group in a room. For example, being the only African American in an organization or on a committee. That can be a very draining experience in and of itself. And I know I really appreciated earlier, Sarah, you said one of your goals was to not have any onlys. That's how you would know when you have a diverse organization. And I think that's so great. And it really relates back to this as well and can help avoid tokenizing any members. So don't pigeonhole your members from underrepresented groups into roles or conversations related to DEI. That is also tokenizing them. Recognize and applaud everyone's strengths, and if possible, connect individuals from underrepresented groups through mentoring. So if your organization has the opportunity to connect individuals from underrepresented groups together for a mentoring experience, that can also be impactful. So another reflection point for your organization is to think about how can you check to make sure that you are not tokenizing an individual. Stop. Again, this might be an opportunity to pause this video to stop and think, how would I actually check that I'm not doing that? And one example I can give you is to simply ask yourself, why am I saying this before you actually speak? And what is your intent and where is it coming from? And don't let your conversations be guided by stereotypes and assumptions. That is one way to avoid tokenizing people. All right, and our last steps towards equity to share with you today is just to monitor and measure often. Creating and implementing a diversity and equity inclusion plan is a crucial first step, but it is not the end of the process. Prioritizing diversity and inclusion and equity is a cycle, right? I try to identify a problem, you try to figure out a plan to address that problem, you implement it, then you monitor and measure. Did it work? Are we doing what we wanted to do? Maybe we thought we should go in this direction and now we're learning we need to go in this direction. And again, that's okay. That's why it's a cycle and it's a process. There's always room for improvement. And so just make sure that you're taking the time to check in on your progress. That's why having time-bound, measurable goals are so important as well, because it kind of forces you to check in. Did we meet that goal? How do we need to readjust? And readjusting is okay. It's okay if you did not meet the goal in the time that you wanted to. The important thing is that you're making progress towards it and you're adjusting as you need to, moving on. Okay, I apologize. I feel like I've done a lot of talking at you today, but I do appreciate you participating as we've gone along here. So let me just summarize today with some of the key takeaways we hope you get from this. Number one, diversity is a first step. It is great to have diverse members in your organization, but it is the first step. It's not necessarily the goal, right? Inclusion has to do with the culture of your organization. Are all voices valued? Are all people invited to the table or invited to dance? I think, as Anna said earlier, are they there, but now are they actually participating? Equity is our goal, right? Of having equal opportunity and equal access so that everyone has the same ability to be successful. And don't forget that it is a process. You're not going to become masters at diversity and inclusion overnight. You might not have a huge paradigm shift in your organization this year even, and that's okay. Again, just the point of being aware of it, making change, making progress. That's what we hope that you work towards and can accomplish in your organization. I will be sharing this if you're interested with all of my references that I use, because there's a lot of great information out there and I only had time to kind of pick out some of the best parts. But there's really great TED Talks, for example, that I watched and listened to as well. So if you are interested in this, just let me know and I'd be happy to send it to you. And with that, does anybody have any questions or topics maybe we didn't get to that you wanted to discuss today? Okay, and I apologize, we've gone over time, so let me just briefly mention, we will have another leadership workshop Thursday at 3 next Thursday on combating loneliness and isolation. We will also have a Wisdom Wednesday kind of informal lunch and learn type event with Dr. Lane, our VP of Student Life and Dean of Students, on February 24th. And we are also undergoing a student organization policy review. So there will be a call in the February CSI update for students to weigh in and provide their feedback on that process. And with that, thank you again so much for being here today. I really appreciate you participating and engaging in this conversation with me. And if you do have any questions or would like to chat more, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. And thanks again.